We are 45 days into one of the largest conflicts in the Middle East that we have seen since 2003 in terms of scale and intensity, without a doubt. But before we get to that, I want to take a few steps back and I want to go back to the Munich conference. Why? I want to go on a bit of a tangent first, right? And just bear with me. It's all going to make sense in about 2 minutes. The last few decades, the West has really let go of itself when it comes to optics, especially in terms of oratory, right? Speeches have just been lacking in personality. And I understand why, right? Due to certain people in World War II, having a good speech is sort of seen as a bad thing in Western circles. You don't want to be seen as an autocrat. I understand that. But it is, optics matter in geopolitics massively. And dare I say, 2026 is the comeback for the speeches in the West. We had two great speeches from the Prime Minister of Canada, Carney, and Rubio. All right. And we also had one just yesterday from Macron. Now, you don't have to agree with these people, but you can agree that their speeches are good, right? Their oratory skills are good. Again, it's something that we've been lacking for ages. I could talk about this for hours, but I won't. I'll get straight to the point now. So Rubio gives his big speech at the Munich conference. All of Europe was worried and anxious about it because JD Vance had a controversial speech last year where he's basically saying that this what's happened to Europe is all Europe's fault. The immigration crisis and all that, it's all Europe's fault, right? Rubio comes in and he pretty much says exactly the same things that JD Vance is saying, but he just says it in a nicer way. And the people in the room loved it, right? The people that were watching online, it was split. The right-wing, more traditional folks loved Rubio's emphasis of the traditionalist morals and the links and the Christian values that both the Americans and the Europeans are linked by. The more pro-EU guys, they read between the lines. And pretty much, if you read between the lines of Rubio's speech, again, I'm going to say this, it's very similar to JD Vance's speech. Why they're both similar is because they're drawing their content, their information straight out of the national security strategy. This is something I've talked about before. I do recommend reading it. And this is going to give you an understanding of this administration's view of the world and what their foreign policy is. All right. So Rubio and Carney have been basically said it from the horse's mouth that the world order as we know it is ending. The post-Cold War order is ending, right? We thought that by we, in terms of these institutions and whatnot, there was this big belief that the liberal democratic views had won, right? And then the whole world would stop. Would be a democracy and we wouldn't see autocracies and whatnot, right? It would all be a la-la land. A lot of people knew that was never going to happen, but there was this belief, right? Especially after communism had ended and whatnot. What we ended up getting was a unipolar world where the US was the hegemon of the world, right? And now we're seeing a return to the multipolar order. A lot of people had called this a few years ago, but now it's coming straight from the horse's mouth. The Western leaders themselves are admitting it, all right? Rubio says it himself. The world as we know it is crumbling apart and everyone has to look out for themselves. And this is where the national security strategy comes in. And trust me, I will link this to Iran. What we're looking at, right, is the US is returning to the Monroe Doctrine. Trump has coined it the Monroe Doctrine. As Trump does, everything has to be about him, sort of, right? The Monroe Doctrine was founded by President Monroe back in the 19th century, and it's a copy of the European version of great power influence, right? A great power has influence over this region, another great power has influence over this region, all right? So President Monroe said that the Americas would be under the influence of the USA, right? That means Central, North, and South. The Western Hemisphere in general, which is a very broad term, and the Monroe Doctrine itself is very broad, as we'll get into in a moment, it's basically saying that it's hands off. This is USA influence, right? Historically, it's been hard to enforce, and it's been very malleable, and it's led to a few conflicts, such as in the Philippines and whatnot. All right. Rubio is saying, and the Trump administration is saying, that we're returning to this. And a lot of people have this idea, this warped idea, that this means isolationism, right? It doesn't. What this means is that the US is going to prioritize the Americas, but it's going to be very pragmatic in terms of where it operates around the world. And this is what we're seeing right now in Iran. If we look at the regions that are listed in order of importance, the Western Hemisphere, according to Trump's administration, is the central most important aspect of the foreign policy. Asia comes second, and we all know why, because China, this great rival, this big power. They want to contain China, and they want to build up the allies in the region. Number 3 is Europe, and Europe is a funny one because Europe is less so about some sort of strategic military interest and more so about building back, in their words, building up Europe back culturally, right? They want Europe to feel, in their sort of words, to feel happy about themselves again, right? And 4th on the list is the Middle East, and 5th is Africa, right? So how did we end up here? How did we end up in Iran when the Middle East is almost at the bottom of the list of importance? Okay, there's 2 ways to look at this. One way is that the US, the current administration, understands and sees in their eyes that in the next 5 to 10 years, the world is going to completely restructure, right? And great powers are going to be starting to rise up. Regional powers are going to be starting to turn into major powers. Why not preemptively start assuring that our hand is stronger than our rivals? Okay, we saw this at the start of the year in Caracas. Now we're starting to see it in Tehran, and we're also starting to see it in Central America with El Mencho getting captured and assassinated under some dodgy circumstances, which we won't get into. And now I believe also in Ecuador as well, right? So the Middle East, taking out Iran or containing Iran, might be part of this preemptive strike to ensure that American influence and American power still has the upper hand around the world, regardless of that they're trying to be America first, right? Another aspect of it is, and this might be somewhat the more truthful way if we listen to some of Rubio's remarks the last 24 hours, is that the Americans, and by Americans I mean this administration and President Trump, they didn't necessarily want this to become such a large-scale conflict as it sort of turned into, and there's several reasons for that. But it seems, if we're going to believe Marco Rubio, and I will sort of show a clip on here, was saying that the Israelis had sort of forced the hands of the Americans, right? And the way he frames it was, we had to attack because if Israel attacked Iran preemptively, in their words, then there was a high risk chance that the Iranians would attack US bases, and so that way we had to attack to stop them most likely attacking our US bases because the Israelis attacked Iran. Very complicated, right? Very, very complicated, and this has gotten Rubio in a lot of trouble in the last 24 hours. It's got a lot of people talking, right? Now, if we give a bit of a quick timeline to all this, how did we all end up here? How did we end up in what US Central Command is saying that they've used double the firepower than Operation Freedom back in 2003? If we're to believe the sources coming out of places like Axios and the Washington Post, which have very close sources to the administration, what we can believe is that at some point, Trump wanted to do a limited strike, sort of symbolic, but sort of nudge the Iranians into a negotiation in where the Americans had the stronger cards, right? Had the better hand, should I say. Then there was a pushback between the more traditional Republicans that was saying that we should go into a conflict with Iran, blah, blah, blah. Allegedly, J.D. Vance was able to influence the president. And J.D. Vance, if you don't know, he's part of, there's sort of two groups, right, in the administration. There's your traditional Republicans, which I say Rubio would fall under, this sort of neocon aspect of it. And then you have the J.D. Vances, which are your more modern America First isolationists, right? What we're having here is, apparently, according to sources, J.D. Vance was able to influence the president and say, look, don't do any strike. Trust me, we can negotiate. What ends up happening, him, Witkoff, Jared Kushner, They go to Oman. They have this very weird meeting where they're not even in the meeting with each other. They're in two separate rooms, and the Omanis are sort of being the middleman. Like, literally like the middleman. Like, the US would have their points. The Omanis would listen. The guy would go into the next room, listen, and then they would exchange. According to reports, things were going in a positive direction, according to reports at the time. And Trump was somewhat convinced. I shouldn't say convinced, but he was leaning towards negotiation. Then we have, but in that sense, troops were still being built up during this time in the region, right? As a backup, I guess you could say. Then Bibi heads to Washington, has this big meeting with President Trump, and a lot of things happened out of that meeting. Once that meeting happened, things started to shift. We started to see a bit of an increase. We started to see an increase in military hardware being sent over. But now, according to the most recent article released, and I believe it was from Axios or somewhere, I'm pretty sure it was Axios. Very interestingly, Netanyahu had said during Trump's meeting in February that they know where the supreme leader is, right? They know where the supreme leader is. We can do this. We can do this big decapitation strike. And the way Axios was framing it was that Netanyahu was trying to convince Trump of engaging in these strikes, especially a very big strike. And look, a lot of people, even we were saying that this was most likely the reason that Netanyahu was going, just to convince Trump and push him in that direction. So it seems, according to these sources, if it's true, that Netanyahu had basically said, listen, the supreme leader is going to be here. We've known, we've been tracking him. We've hacked the security cameras. We know exactly where he is. This is going to be great for us. It's going to be nice, quick, and easy. Big decapitation event, bunker buster bombs, tongue twister and a half there. Bunker buster bombs. We smash the whole thing. Boom, it's over in 3-4 days, right? What ends up happening, though, over time, Witkoff says that the president is frustrated with the Iranians, blah, blah, blah. Things don't really go anywhere, even though the Iranians are saying that the meetings are going good, right? And who knows how much of that was true, whether that was true, that there were conflicting reports that this was going somewhere and that other people were saying that it wasn't. Witkoff, after the attacks, after this new war started, was pretty much saying that the meetings weren't going anywhere. I wonder why he wasn't saying that during during the meetings. Why did he wait until after? Who knows? But we're here now. We're here. 4 days in. 4 days in. What has happened? All right. Let me just explain the scale. Let me explain the scale of this, right? We're seeing 2,000 to 3,000 munitions dropped in 3 days. And I'm not talking about mortar shells and artillery shells. I'm talking about bunker buster bombs, right? I'm talking about JDMs. I'm talking about 300-400 kilo bombs, missiles, you name it. 3,000 probably in the last 3 days. More than 1,000 targets have been hit, right? To quote the operation, to quote US Central Command, this was double the intensity of Operation Iraqi Freedom, right? Double. And if you're not sure how big of a scale this is, like, we don't understand how big of a scale this thing is because we're only seeing clips from Twitter. We're seeing things that are released 12 hours later, whatever. We're not seeing the full picture, and we definitely did not see the full picture during the first few hours of the initial attacks, right? I want you to pause this video and come back to it, but pause this video and go back to, go on YouTube search bar and type in 2003 and look at the initial bombings. That's what we're looking at. At the time, until this day, this is considered one of the greatest videos in terms of just showing sheer American firepower. Now imagine that times 2. That's where we were just 4 days ago, right? But in that sense, everything has been going good, right? And everything's been going good. There's a continuous air bridge. Gradually, the US and the Israelis are starting to get air superiority over Western Iran. Not totally over Tehran yet, but they're getting there. Why? Because they have a 24/7 air bridge in the sky. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about here, imagine a ski lift that's taking skiers all the way around. It's operating 24/7. But instead of that, instead of skiers on the ski lift, it's F-22s, F-15s, F-18s, F-32s, whatever, B-52s, B-1 bombers, everything constantly flying, right? You shoot a few missiles, you drop a few bombs, you go and refuel, you drop a few more bombs. Then what you do, you fly back to base and the next squadron comes in. And this is continuous, 24/7 almost, right? It's unprecedented. So you would think that the mood would be great. You'd think that the mood in the White House would be excellent. But according to insider sources, Trump's mood and the overall mood of the administration is a bit sour. It's a bit confused. Why is that? I think to explain, right, there was a strategic miscalculation of things, right? The US appears to have naively believed that this would be a quick decapitation war. Again, probably convinced by the Israelis to commit to this. We're going to kill 30, 40 guys. We're going to kill the supreme leader. It's going to be this big thing. Then the Iranians are going to go up in an uprising and it's going to be a big revolution. Boom, over in a week. Boom. Amazing. It's clear that that has not happened, right? That has not happened yet. Number one, I'm going to say, what do you get out of killing an 85-year-old man that allegedly had cancer, right? According to some sources. What you did was you made him a martyr and you've now united the hardcore regime supporters even more, all right? And where is this belief that a decapitation strike would work on Iran, given that I would say that the Iranians are so used to decapitation strikes and assassinations the last 40 years that if you move up the hierarchy, there's a clause in your contract that pretty much says you will most likely be assassinated at some point, right? And these people still keep taking these positions, right? After everything that's happened, they keep taking the positions and we haven't seen some sort of massive uprising happen just yet in terms of internally. And now in terms of the people, we haven't seen that happen yet. We haven't seen that happen. The military apparatus, the Revolutionary Guard, they're still supporting the regime, okay? So this becomes a worry now. Okay? Because what has ended up happening is the Iranians have gone under the Mosaic doctrine. And what this pretty much means is they've adopted a decentralized command, right? Which makes sense. Like I said, the Iranians would without a doubt have thought, okay, let's be real here. We simply do not have the intelligence necessary to stop the Mossad operating the way that they do. Historically, this just proves it. Let's just create a plan because we definitely know that they're going to strike the leadership. What's going to happen if they take out the whole leadership? Boom, we're going to operate the Mosaic doctrine. What this pretty much means is think of like a mosaic. There's tiny tiles that make up the big picture, right? Very symbolic, right? The Soviets and I believe the Russians still have a similar thing in terms of their nuclear doctrine as well, right? A decentralized command. So there isn't too much known about it, but read military commanders in separate regions of Iran in terms of the missile facilities and the underground cities where these missiles are being launched from, they have the ability to fire at will and make their own choices, right? We don't know the exact level of coordination. There has to be some level of coordination. Otherwise, we wouldn't really be seeing these attacks, again, in the coordinated manner that we're seeing them. Large salvos, smaller salvos. Then we see like the Shahed drones coming in. The first day, we didn't see that. So there has to be some level of coordination, but we don't know how much, right? Now, we're 4 to 5 days in. Like I said, the Iranian regime is no way closer to falling than it was during the 12-day war or right before or at the start. If anything, the regime is now more unified in terms of its current supporters than ever. All right? And we're still seeing non-stop attacks. We're also starting to see US servicemen and women deaths. I believe we're up to 6 now. And I said this in my live stream. The war with Iran is not popular amongst the general public. You have to remember, Trump ran on the campaign that he's anti-war. He's this big peace guy. He's the guy that wants to win the Nobel Prize. He's ended 7 conflicts now. And what has he pretty much done here? He's pretty much started the largest regional conflict in the world. If we take out Ukraine and Russia, this is the largest conflict we've seen since 2003. All right, which at the moment has no end in sight. And this is the issue. This is the issue. They wanted a quick war. They didn't want a protracted war, because the longer this war drags on, right, and there's no regime change, people are going to start questioning what was the point of this besides backing up Israel, even though Israel was the one that launched preemptive strikes. All right. So, if we now move on a little bit, okay, there's this big belief that everything was going to end, and it hasn't. If anything, the Iranian retaliation has caught everyone off by surprise. I said it before, this firepower that the Americans and the Israelis have, the Iranians are fighting an uphill battle, an uphill mountain battle. This is going to be extremely hard. But in the first few days, they've been doing all right. If we're going to look at it in somewhat strategic terms, in the first day they launched around 200 to 300 missiles, which is pretty gradually started to drop off, and I will get into that. They've launched, I believe, over 900 Shahed. I don't want to say Shahed because there'll be different types of drones, but they've launched over 900 drones, right? Not only have they hit Israel, but they have done significant damage to US bases near Iran. So we're talking about Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE. Things that we haven't seen before. Things that we weren't really expecting, that the Trump administration was hoping wouldn't happen. Because you have to think, right, this gigantic buildup was pretty much to ensure that there's a minimum amount of negative press as possible. Because, again, like I said, the war is not popular. Trump ran on this big belief that he's going to end all these wars, that he's not going to be the big intervention guy. So he wanted to ensure that the more military power we have here, the less chance that something's going to blow up and then everything goes horribly wrong in terms of the polls and whatnot, right? Now, we've started seeing hits on military bases that's led to the death to 4 to 6 servicemen and women. We've seen damages in the billions of dollars. The Iranians, at least so far, have some sort of strategy in place. They have some sort of strategy in place, and we can see that because they're specifically targeting multi-billion-dollar radar systems and surveillance systems in the region, right? There could be many reasons for this. The most likely reason is that they're trying to blind and create a pathway for their more advanced missiles to come through and be able to hit Israel and bigger targets. Another thing that they've been doing, and this is very controversial, is that they've been hitting American allies in the region, both economically, right, and I guess you could say in the civilian scape. There's several reasons for this. The Iranian FM had said that once they killed the supreme leader, all rules were out the window, right? All rules were out the window. And they're attacking these hotels and whatnot, in one sense, to damage the prestige and to damage the reputation of the Gulf states as these big tourist hubs that everyone's safe, right? There's this big idea behind that. But also, allegedly, they're targeting US service members that are in these hotels, because you have to remember, the US had expected these attacks on these bases. So they evacuated everyone, but they couldn't just evacuate everyone home. So a lot of them had stayed in the hotels. And based on Iranian intelligence and people leaking themselves on video, allegedly the Iranian drones that are being fired into these buildings were targeting these soldiers. Another thing to consider, and if you've watched the Ukraine war for a while now, the reality is, if there's electronic warfare systems in place or these drones malfunction, they don't just drop out of the sky. They'll pretty much glide their way into something. And unfortunately, it's very sad. A lot of the times, especially in cities, they're just going to fly into a building. It doesn't necessarily mean that the Iranians are targeting just random buildings, right? It wouldn't make sense from a strategic point of view. So there's also that option. There's also that option. And the drone campaign has been pretty effective. And I have to shake my head here. I don't understand. I don't understand how this is happening. And again, I'm taking a analytical point of view. I'm not taking a side here. I'm not taking a side. If I was someone in the Western camp, I would be extremely embarrassed by what the Iranians are doing with this drone campaign. What is happening is they have no answer for it. They're wasting interceptors. This is a big problem. The US and the allies are wasting interceptors that cost millions of dollars on drones that cost between 35,000 and 50,000 USD. This is the Iranian plan, actually, right? They want to exhaust the interceptors as much as possible. I can't believe 4 years on. Imagine that the allies, that the West, right, had an ally that has been fighting this exact type of war for the last 4 years. And imagine if they had just taken down some notes and adapted to modern warfare. Yet they didn't. They didn't. The US had failed to adapt to what we've been seeing in Ukraine the last 4 years. The Ukrainians have established a very strong layered system to strike down these Shahed drones. Again, not perfect, but we're seeing autonomous robots with targeting systems. We're seeing interceptor drones for the Shahed type drones. We're seeing classic anti-air guns from World War II, even further back. Why has this not been implemented? Why? And this is simply embarrassing. And I will just to make a bit of a tangent. Again, we have to ask ourselves, how serious is NATO and how serious is the West about future conflicts if they're not adapting to these things? They're talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk at the moment. If we go back to, I believe, Latvia or Estonia, the war games last year, there was a Ukrainian drone team that was invited and they were meant to act as the Russians, right? And there was meant to be this war games things, and they were a drone unit, right? They were a drone unit. And what ends up happening is this drone unit, which is around 10 guys, knocks out vehicles that make up two brigades worth. 2 brigades worth of NATO vehicles got knocked out in half a day of combat because NATO, again, they have the largest war since World War II on their border, literally, essentially, right? And they have not adapted to anything. And then clearly the Americans haven't either. And there's no answers for it yet. I can't believe no one's shipped in just some loaded bloody 50 cal machine guns, quads, and just started shooting these Shahed drones. Funnily enough, they've been more effective than these missiles have been, right? So, and we're heading into this 4-day thing now. It's 4 to 5 days. And what's funny is that the administration does not want to admit that this is a war. Then they get caught up in these things and they say it is a war. Like they'll be in an interview and they say this is a war. Then they get asked the next day and they're like, oh, no, this isn't a war. Why are they doing this, right? Why are they doing this? Because if they admit that it's a war and then it drags out, it's a very horrible look, right? You don't want to be seen as the government that has started a protracted war in the Middle East, especially, again, I'm not going to reiterate it all, but because of Trump's whole campaign, right? To me, I'm thinking of the Spider-Man pointing meme, right? Where everyone was saying the 3-day military operation for the Russians. Now we're seeing the 3-day special operation for the Americans in the Middle East, right? Like these things just come in circles, it seems. Then we're seeing Western air defense problems, right? 3 F-15s are shot down by a Kuwaiti F-18. Again, why is this happening? It could be because of the radars that have been destroyed and damaged in the region. It could be congestion. It could be communication issues. It could be a wide range of things. And again, like we haven't learned. And by we, I'm saying this to someone from Australia, the West has not yet learned. And time is running out because I'll tell you who is learning. I'll tell you who is adapting. The North Koreans are directly engaged in the Ukraine war so that they can learn how to fight a modern war. The Chinese, just look at some of their training videos. The Chinese, which are some of the biggest suppliers of drones, and especially fiber optic drones, are employing many of the tactics that we're seeing in Ukraine, yet we're not. So how did we get here? I don't know, right? So, and again, are we seeing the full picture of this conflict? That's very hard to tell. It's right overall, and this is what I was saying earlier. The Iranian salvos are shrinking at an astounding rate. I have some of the stats here, and look, they may be a bit biased, but I've tried to sort of find a few, and they roughly all agree. In the first day, we had 350. The second day, and I'm talking about the missiles launched by Iran, we had 350. We had 175 in day 2. Day 3, 120. Day 4, we had only 50. So what's going on here is there's two things that are most likely going on. Number one is that the Iranians are possibly trying to drag this out. The Iranians know that in a protracted conflict, they're going to have the upper hand. For every day that the Americans are at war, it's costing them, I would say, somewhere between $1 to $3 billion, right? Just some quick math. If we look at the 12-day war and these how much things were costing then, right? This is double, triple the scale of things. We're looking at $1 billion plus a day. We also have to think about the ammunition. Again, the interceptors. How many interceptors do we have left, right? This is a big cause for concern because we have to think what conflict awaits us most likely in the next 5 to 10 years. It ends up somewhere in the South China Sea, right? So we have that to consider, right? These things are expensive. Tomahawk missiles, they're expensive to make. Again, I'm not going to get into the whole big thing there, but you get the picture. The other perspective is, and this is another most likely scenario, is that the American and Israeli firepower is so dominant right now that the Iranian ability to launch large-scale missile salvos is being depleted, which makes sense, right? Iran has, I believe, if I just have a quick look here, I might not have it exactly on me. I might not have it exactly on me, but Iran has at least, I believe, 20 to 50 underground facilities. And by underground, like these are gigantic facilities that fit fighter jets, that fit missiles, thousands of missiles, right? They're missile building facilities. Hundreds of launch platforms. They have hundreds, I believe, at least 500 vehicle-borne launch platforms, right? Like those big trucks that have been turned into missile launchers. They have those. At the moment, we're seeing videos coming out of Iran where Reaper drones and other US drones and recon drones are pretty much flying at a low altitude during the daytime. This suggests that they have strong confidence that Iranian air defense systems are heavily degraded. This is something I talked about before. It will be the ultimate Achilles heel for the Iranians, is a very lackluster air defense system, and we're seeing that already. All things considered, right? We're seeing still gradual we're seeing 50 right now, which is still all right. But again, we have to look back at how these things are launched. I wouldn't say that these trucks are very expensive pieces and complicated pieces of hardware, but you have to drive this big truck out of a launch site, which Iran right now is the most surveilled country on earth. They have a massive heat signature, especially when you launch the missile. Then you have to drive them back, reverse them back in. You have to hide them because a lot of them just look like normal trucks with the camouflage that they have on them. And then you have to reload them with a crane that takes 50 to 60 minutes. So it's a slow and dangerous process. We have, I believe, been seeing Iranians trying to launch these missiles at night, and that could be a way to sort of circumnavigate this surveillance. All right, so again, it's hard to tell what we're seeing, but based off the mood of again, if you look at some of Trump's speeches and the way he walked off recently, the mood isn't too great, right? Are the Iranians losing in terms of air superiority, in terms of missiles being fired? Yes, but the big goal is not being achieved. The big goal is not being achieved. And what is the big goal? It's regime change. And I would say even the balkanization of Iran, because Israel wants to see Iran permanently unstable in the sense that it can never pose a threat to Israel again, right? And by balkanization, I mean smaller groups of autonomous regions that run Iran, right? There are many ethnicities there. There are the Kurds, which we were about to get into. There's the Azaris, and you have the more Sunni groups, right, near the south. We've talked about the Gulf. Now the Kurds. This is the big thing. according to Axios, I was reading now that the CIA and the Israelis have been supplying the Kurdish groups on the Iraq-Iran border with weapons since last year. So definitely there has been some sort of plan in place. And if we look at where the missiles have been fired in terms of the Israelis and the Americans, a lot of it is heavily in the western region of Iran and the north where the Azeris are, and the west where the Kurdish areas are. This is not by coincidence. This is not by coincidence. What I imagine, and in the next coming days, the next couple of weeks maybe, but definitely in the next coming days, is that we're going to see these armed groups being propped up by Iran and Israel and backed up by airstrikes trying to rise up. The Iranians have already begun to respond, that they've been bombing the border, they've been bombing HQs in Iraq, right? And we have verified information on that has been happening. But this is a very, very risky maneuver here. Very dangerous for two reasons. Number one, if the Kurds rise up, what you might end up getting is Iranians that were on the fence now uniting based on Iranian territorial integrity, right? The Middle East is a very complicated place, right? And territory historically is super important. The villages and the towns you're from is what matters, right? So seeing an autonomous region break apart may unite more people to the regime, all right? Secondly, one of the largest allies to the US in the region are the Turks, a NATO member which has conflict, regional sort of conflict with the Israelis. Are they going to be happy with one of their longest enemies in the region, the Kurds, being funded and supported? Right? They were not too happy about it in Syria. They launched several military campaigns against Western-backed Kurds, right? I don't think that that's going to go well with the Turks, right? And again, what's the big question here? What are we going to be seeing here? I genuinely don't think that the US government knows where this is going to go, and this is where the sour mood is coming from. What is this going to turn into? Is this going to turn into another ISIS-style proxy ground war where you have Kurdish groups very similar to when they were fighting ISIS being backed up by coalition air support against the Iranian army and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and other militant groups that are pro-regime, right? And these aren't small forces. I believe that the Revolutionary Guard Corps has around 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers, right? The Shia militias themselves have over 100,000 soldiers, and they're loyal to the regime. The military is going to have loyal aspects to it. How united are these different Kurdish groups going to be? I mean, we have a very tense history with some of the Kurdish groups, which are pretty much communist and have had issues with the US government before. These different nationalities, are they going to rise up? Are they going to work together? This is a very, very slippery slope for the for the Trump administration right now. Very slippery slope. So to summarize these last 4 days, it's definitely not what the US what the current administration had hoped for, without a doubt. Without a doubt. It's not what Trump wanted. I genuinely believe that Trump did not want to go into this conflict, especially what it's turning into right now, okay? If the interceptors go low, there's going to be long-term issues, and this administration will be blamed for that. If interceptors start going low, and if the Iranians are still able to fire missile salvos, if we go back to the 12-day war, they were able to still fire missiles 12 days in, but this is a whole different ball game, right? We're seeing B-52s bombing, we're seeing B-1 bombers attacking and whatnot, right? So this is a whole different ball game now. What is going to happen here? Who knows? Who knows? I believe the next 4 days will give us more insight. These 4 days, the first 4 or 5 days, they didn't really explain much. But I believe the next 4 days will start giving us a better picture on what strategy that the Israelis and the Americans have chosen. Again, by all accounts, it seems that they will try to do something with these nationalist ethnic groups in Western Iran, especially with the Kurds. But we will see. We will see. What is confirmed, though, is that the Iranian regime still stands. And yeah, I mean, that's the overall gist of it. I'm just trying to think if I've sort of missed anything here. It hasn't gone the way that the US had wanted. And Trump, again, he's been big. His whole campaign is America first, isolationism. If we're starting to see mass casualties, right? If we're starting to see mass casualty events in terms of US soldiers being killed, whether it be on ships or bases again, this is going to ruin the midterms, because the midterms are coming up. The midterms are coming up. And this Iran conflict is going to determine a lot of the polls for the midterms. And the midterms are already sketchy, right? We had the tariffs, you had the economy, you have all these things, right? Trump needs this to go right. But what is concerning me, and this could be just a distraction of some sorts, and I'm hoping it is the Gang of Eight, the big Gang of Eight, they were informed about the current status of the whole war, and you had the senators come out and they get asked these questions. And they said that ground troops are not being ruled out. Ground troops are not being... This is scary, and this is probably where I'll probably end the video for now. This is concerning. Ground troops in Iran. Let's just think about this. I don't think we're going to be seeing some type of Iraq thing. Again, it just would not make sense. And logistically, I just don't think it's possible at the moment, right? And if we look at geographically, Iran is one of the hardest places to invade. Just ask the Romans, ask Trajan. Read this book if you want, and it will tell you. It is a desert. The south is a desert salt plain with nothing for hundreds of kilometers. Alexander the Great had to walk through that after his 10-year campaign in the east, and it had almost destroyed him. It maybe even led to his fast decline in health and death very shortly afterwards. Had to walk through this desert plain, right? The center, the north, and the east is just mountainous. It's mountain, it's rugged. Mountainous hills, very complicated for a ground war. A conventional ground war, and we've already seen, and we have evidence that the US and NATO and the West in general is not ready for modern warfare. I'll tell you who has been a leading innovator: the Iranians. They're the ones who pretty much started these attack drones, right? Which the Russians had, funnily enough, just copied and just made their own, and now the US has even copied them. So are we going to be seeing that? No. What we might be seeing, and it's sort of been confirmed on the Israeli side, that we will see boots on the ground in terms of special forces. Again, look back to when the Kurds were fighting ISIS. They were mixed with special forces groups, right? So we could be seeing that. But again, extremely unpopular. Again, is this sort of a distraction, or is this a desperation thing? Who knows? Who knows? I want you guys to let us know in the comments. In terms of plugs, nothing to plug. You guys have been supporting the channel. Keep supporting it. Spread the good word. We're trying to grow this as much as possible. If you love the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Send us a DM. And most importantly, make sure you're on our free daily newsletter. Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode.